Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for giving your time tonight to be part of our online information session for the 1050 Spiller Road proposal. This is the first of four engagement activities where you can either ask staff questions online or in person. So before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that tonight's meeting is taking place on the traditional and unceded territories of the Syilx Okanagan Nation, and we extend our appreciation to the Syilx Okanagan people for the opportunity to hold this meeting here today. And so your hosts. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joanne Klebb, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Engagement, and I'll be the facilitator moderator of tonight's session. With me are Nicole Capewell, who is a planner and the lead on this file. We also have Audrey Tanguay, who is our Planning and Licensing Manager, and we have Michael Hodges, our Development Infrastructure Manager, and we have Blake Lavin, our Director of Development Services, and we may have a few more staff join us throughout the night. And here's one of them now. Kristen Dixon is also going to be available if there are specific questions for the infrastructure area. And so before we get started, I just want to take a moment to share with you, what is the city's role in this application process? Well, our job is to facilitate the process for considering these applications. The staff, that many of which you see in front of you, review the applications for alignment with regulations and city policies and plans. And we conduct a process to involve residents that's in accordance with our OCP engagement procedure. And so I just want to take a moment to kind of share a story with you about the OCP engagements procedure. Historically, engagement on these types of proposals was fully the responsibility of the developer and really rested on their shoulders, just how their proposal moved forward. And so the first time there was really a public process attached to it is when the proposal came before council to be given a first reading of a bylaw for the required OCP amendment. Now, with the last Spiller proposal, there was quite a bit of outcry and a lot of interest in it. And we just didn't have a mechanism in place to capture that feedback. There were hundreds of emails, there were letters to the editor, there was petitions, there were protests, and we had no process or tools in order to kind of capture that feedback, make it a matter of public record, and give council an opportunity to consider it as part of making a decision. So based on what happened with that previous proposal, we designed this procedure to make sure that the community had an opportunity to consider these proposals before they hit the council table. And so that's what tonight's all about, and that's what this procedure is all about. It's about making sure that the community has a predictable and consistent way of becoming aware of these proposals and of being involved, and that you know that your feedback is collected and shared with the public, with staff, with the applicant, and with council should the applicant move forward with their application. And so with that, I'll just share briefly what are our goals tonight. Well, first, this is a new proposal. We want to make sure you're aware of the different elements of it, and so that you're basing your opinion on the current proposal and not past proposals you might have seen. We want to give you an opportunity to learn about it and ask questions, and we want to understand your concerns and gather that feedback for the applicant, staff, and council. And our focus is really on understanding and getting some clarity on the land uses that are being considered and what is really going to be acceptable to the community, so that we can provide that feedback to council. And so you have a role in tonight as well. We're hoping that you're going to come with an open mind, that you'll hear what the proposal is and all the information that we have to share, that you'll take advantage of the opportunities to get your questions answered, and also that you're respectful of staff and of the other participants, so that this is really a meaningful and positive experience for all involved. And so how does it work? as I mentioned, the session is recorded. This makes it possible for me to put it up on Shape Your City tomorrow so that anyone who wasn't able to attend can hear the same discussion. When it comes to asking your questions, we're up to 42 participants. And so unfortunately, it just makes it really difficult to have people address staff directly. So how we ask you to submit your questions is to provide them in the Q&A box. And as you can see, Lorraine has got us started. Lorraine is not new to this process, so she knows you're going to get her questions in the Q&A box so that we have a queue that when it comes time to the Q&A for the Q&A period, we can kind of go through in a systematic way. Now, we also will be having a few interactive polls. It's to make sure you're paying attention and so that we can gather your feedback. And I want to just make sure people understand I will be moderating this, and it will be fairly strictly moderated just out of consideration for everyone's time. And what I also want to mention is that we will, this is a great opportunity for us to understand more about your concerns. If you want your word for word comments to be shared with the applicant staff and potentially council and the we encourage you to also fill out a feedback form where you can put in writing exactly what it is that you want to share. It is staff's responsibility to kind of pull together summaries of these sessions, but really, if you want your words on the record, please do fill out the feedback form. And also one other little reminder, so the intent of these sessions is really to understand the issues so that we can help inform council's decision if the application moves forward. And it's important that people understand that community feedback is one of several factors that council must balance and consider when making these decisions. And so let's get started and let's see if you know how to use your Zoom polls. I'm going to go ahead and launch it. And just give me a second here. And our first Zoom poll is, we want to know what brought you out tonight. What is your interest in attending today? And it's really largely based on your location. Are you a member of the PIB? Are you a resident or business owner in Penticton? Are you a resident business owner in Naramata or other? So as I mentioned, we have how many? 42 people on the line today so far. And I apologize, I meant to have an RDOS option. So thank you, Lindsay, for sending that in the chat. Please do put that in the other, and we can definitely recognize that we have residents of the RDOS participating tonight. And so it looks like people's answers are, we've heard from just about everybody. That's great. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share with you the results so that you can see who's here tonight. So I think you're able to see the poll results. And so we do have 2 RDOS members who let us know that in the chat. And you can see that the majority of people here are residents or business owners in Penticton, and followed by residents or business owners in Naramata. Okay, and so that brings us to a bit of our agenda. So we're going to start off with an intro to our official community plan. Very, very brief. Audrey's going to help us out with that. Nicole's going to give you an overview of the application. And then we do have some FAQs that we want to share with you that might help make our process tonight a little more efficient of your time. And then at the end, we will discuss and gather feedback. So as John and Lorraine have started us off, we will be going to the Q&A for your answers. And with that, I'll stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to Audrey.
Thank you so much, Joanne. So good evening, everyone. So this section of the presentation will give some background about the city's official community plan. So the purpose of the official community plan is to provide a framework of goals and policies to guide decisions on planning and land use within the city of Penticton. The OCP was created with substantial public involvement and is meant to guide the city up to 2045. the official community plan establishes goals and policy to enable sustainable growth in our community. So the next slide indicate that the city is expected to see an average annual population growth rate of 0.65% to 2046. The 2021 census shows that Penticton has been growing quickly in the last 5 years, with an average population growth rate of 1.86% per year between 2016 and 2021. The official community plan outlined areas where the city expects growth to occur. In the 2002 official community plan, many areas up in the hillsides were expected to be developed, as you see on the map to the left. In the 2019 official community plan, most of these growth areas have been scaled back to the build-up area of town, but there's still a few hillside areas, including the Spittle Road area, which is identified as one of the 4 yellow areas shown on the map on the right. So the next section of the presentation will focus on the development proposal received for 1050 Spiller Road. And again, I just want to reiterate that the purpose of today's session is to provide information to help the public to understand the planning process. I would like to repeat that we're not here to defend or to promote the proposal, but just to provide the information. So moving into the proposal, the applicant is proposing to construct a single-family neighborhood development. The conceptual layout at this time shows approximately 112 potential lots that range from 0.5 acres to 1.5 acres in size. The property is of significant size, being just over 50 hectares. It is currently vacant, largely treed, and in a natural state. The property is zoned country residential and mobile home park and has a diversity of OCP designation. In terms of the location, the subject lands are located near the eastern boundary of the city along the Naramata Bench. It's approximately 5 kilometers from downtown Penticton and located just north of the Campbell Mountain Landfill. The property is located in a hillside setting and gradually increases in topography towards the east. Now moving on into the background, it's important to note that this area of the city has been identified for development since 1980s and earlier. This is not a recent decision to consider developing this property. It has been identified as an area for single-family residential growth in many city policy documents. These plans listed right here on the slide are the more recent documents that provided policy and consideration that should be made when these lands are developed. Of note, the 2014 Spittle Road, Reservoir Road Area Neighborhood Concept Plan and the new 2019 Official Community Plan include specific guidelines on how hillside development is to occur, ensuring that development consider hillside and wildfire interface hazard, areas of environmental sensitivity, and ensuring development fits with the natural landscape. The diversity of OCP designation that actually currently exists on the property includes a number of designations that are just listed on the slide. So we've got some ground-oriented residential designation, detached residential designation, a small portion of rural residential, parks, natural and conservation areas, as well as landfill and landfill buffer. So kind of going back to what I mentioned about the OCP, is the OCP is what we consider like kind of that future vision and what is envisioned, by 2045. So now I'm going to try to break down a few of those existing designations on the property. So underlined here are the residential OCP designations that are on the property. To the right of the screen, you can see ground-oriented residential, which as noted can support a medium density development type, including duplexes with suite cluster housing, fourplexes, as well as barrel and stratas. Moving to the next slide, so looking at the property map, here's where you can see the ground-oriented residential designation. It's located centrally on the property and would support any of those building types that I just mentioned. Now, moving on to the next designation on the property is what we call detached residential. As you can see on the slide, it supports single detached houses with secondary suite or carriage houses. It's also would support duplexes, small scale commercial, and manufactured home. So this designation, which is now shown on the next slide as what we see on the kind of light yellow there. So you'll notice it is the primary designation currently that's on that property. So this supports up to duplex units on lots through this area. Single family is also permitted in this designation, but the zones that are supported through the detached residential designation are more commonly what you see in the urban settings, not really the rural setting. They allow for much smaller and narrow lot sizes. The last residential designation is what we call rural residential. This is associated with single family homes with either a carriage house or secondary suite. And we see that these designations in the rural areas somewhat is mixed with in some location with some agricultural area. There's only one small portion of rural residential on the next slide that exists on this property, which is right along Speller Road to the right. So as stated, these are what's existing today in the OCP designation on this property. This is current, this is not what's being proposed. And I will now pass over to Ms. Capewell to discuss the actual current proposal.
Thanks, Audrey. So with this information about the current OCP designations in mind, we'll move on to what's being proposed today by the applicant. This is what the applicant has brought forward to staff, council, and the public for consideration and feedback. They are wanting to reduce the densities that are envisioned, again, by that future document, our official community plan, to be rural residential, as well as considering to allow for half-acre lots. As shown on the screen, the applicant intends to designate the majority of the property for rural residential development. They've also made considerations for parks as well as natural and conservation areas and the landfill and landfill buffer. So the rural residential designation, just to look at it a little bit closer from what we just saw with Audrey, is designed for those rural areas that have single detached houses on large lots. This is the kind of the step before we get into larger agricultural lands. So this designation expects to see those single family homes with secondary suites or carriage houses as the most density. This is the designation and density that the applicant is requesting. However, as we just reviewed, the OCP currently supports more densities at this particular location. And just a reminder, they are looking to do a half-acre lot. So that's noted on the slide here. The rural residential would allow for the half-acre lot sizes is the request that they have in place. So again, this next slide is similar to what we looked at before. You'll see that the ground-oriented and detached residential designations are proposed to be removed. This is why an OCP amendment is required. This is why we're coming to the community and asking, what do you think about removing those two designations? It's to reduce that density that we're envisioning long-term on the property in the future.
Okay, so hopefully you've increased your planning acumen and we're ready to do our next poll. So our next poll is about, regardless of the proposal, we really want to get your feedback on the land use of this on this site. So without thinking about what's been put forward, what is acceptable to you, or what OCP designation do you prefer for this location? We've got three options for you. Do you prefer the existing OCP designation? Do you prefer the proposed OCP designation, or do you have another suggestion that you'd like to see? And I'll just mention that I see some comments coming into the hosts and panelists in the chat. You may want to change your to go to everyone so that you can share your comments also with the larger group. So we've heard from 23 of 47 of our participants. So we'll just give you another few seconds to to share your thoughts after Audrey and Nicole's discussion. And I see Lorraine has offered an explanation of why she's chosen other. And yeah, please do expand on your thoughts in the chat. We do get to export all of this so that we kind of keep a record of the feedback received. So it's really valuable if you provide your thoughts in the chat, as well as submitting questions through the Q&A. Okay, I think we've heard from 39 of our 46 attendees, and I'm going to go ahead and end, or 40 now, I'm going to end the poll, and I'll share with you what people have said. Okay, so you should be seeing the results now. And so this is interesting. So there is about 35% of you would like the OCP designation to stay as it is. Please do let us know why you made that choice in the chat. We have another 18% that would prefer the proposed designation. Again, give us some context there. And then the biggest response is other. And again, we're starting to see some explanations in the chat around people preferring this to be removed from the future growth area or keeping it as a natural area. So again, we're looking for your comments on the land use of this location, regardless of the proposal. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and we'll carry on. Please do continue to share your thoughts in the chat. Okay, and I think it's back to you, Nicole.
Thanks, Joanne. So we have been talking primarily about the OCP designation so far. Again, that's the future thinking document. So what do we want to see and support at that location in the future? Zoning is the other land use tool that we use, which regulates what can be built on a property right now. Zoning is used to regulate things such as different uses, building types, densities, as well as their setbacks, building heights, among many other items that we can regulate through a zoning bylaw. So this map shows the current zoning on the subject property. As you can see, it is largely country residential and contains a small portion of mobile home park zoning. So if an application was made to develop to this zoning, provided that all of the zoning bylaw regulations can be met, the applicant would be able to proceed with development under the current zoning that exists today. And so this next slide here shows the proposed zoning, which is a country residential cluster zone. Staff are proposing a new zone that would accommodate the proposed development that's come forward. So this zone would allow for that minimum 0.5 acre lot sizes that we talked about earlier. There is a provision that the 0.5 acre lot sizes can only be possible if a community sewer system is able to be connected to. Otherwise, they would be required to meet a 1 acre lot size, which is currently the minimum lot size for a country residential zone. Through this application, we identified a gap in our city zoning bylaw for those half-acre lots, which is something that's kind of between an urban lot and those larger rural lots that we have. This zone is anticipated that it could assist with that gap and help to provide some of those single-family homes that are needed within the city, as identified within our official community plan for where we're going to accommodate our growth over the years.
Okay, so that is the main part of the proposal. We're going to start moving into the questions now. And so before we get into your questions, we have been hearing and seeing a lot of feedback that you've been sending into council and in other communication vehicles. And so we've put together some of those frequently asked questions, and we're just going to kind of go through those now. And now remember, our job here is just to provide you with the answers. We understand that you may not agree with the answers, and that's what the feedback form is. If you don't like the answers or you have better suggestions, put it in your feedback form so that we can have a record of everything. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Nicole, or actually, I guess, Nicole, shall I introduce the questions and then you can be the answer person?
That sounds great, Joanne.
Okay. All right. Our first question is, why are we doing an OCP amendment? We should just follow the OCP that's in place today.
Yeah, so as we reviewed earlier, the OCP designations that exist on the property today support densities of duplex and townhouses, and also supports the development of more urban residential lots that are smaller in size and lot width. While many may feel that this is an acceptable land use for this area and that the city needs those housing units, we have heard more informally over the past year from many of the vocal groups that this area should be maintained and kept more for rural development. And I'm seeing in the chat possibly now we're seeing it may be something else that the public is also thinking of. If rural development or other items are the ideal density for this property, then the OCP that exists today does not necessarily match what the public wants here in the future. So this is what we're trying to identify through this process, what the public wants to see in the future. So we are here to collect data from the public to assist council in determining whether an OCP designation is warranted. That's what this public process is for. I do want to just note as well that our OCP is a changing document and it's meant to evolve and adapt with our community over time. So while we talked about documents, policy documents that date back over 40 years ago, where we may have thought that this was a great place for all of that density to go, this might not be what we want to see here anymore. So that's where this OCP amendment process comes in place, and we check in with the community again to see what do you want to see here for that future.
Great, thanks, Nicole. I didn't skip past one there, did I? No, okay. So very common comment we hear is what this type of or adding development in this area, how it's going to increase traffic and how is it going to be handled? Is that Michael Hodges' question?
Sure. So as part of the detailed subdivision process, we will require the developer to do a much more detailed traffic impact assessment. But as part of the official community plan amendment, they have looked at doing an initial traffic impact assessment to measure the impact on the existing road network based on the additional traffic proposed from this OCP change and land use change that they're showing. What that has identified is that the road network that exists is busy, but is more than capable of handling the traffic that is generated. The only real challenges come around some of the intersections, specifically in the way they're designed, like the intersection at the bottom of Reservoir Road, Narramatta, and McMillan's. That's an intersection that needs some work. And as we go into the subdivision phase of any development that occurs here, we'll work with the developer, requiring them to do the upgrades to that intersection to make the improvements that are required.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, the next one is how will the proposed development be serviced with water and sewer? There are not services to this area currently. Another Michael question.
That's correct. There are no service. There is water on Narramatta Road. And what would happen is the water will be connected from Narramatta Road up to this new development. And because of the lot sizes proposed, the municipal sewer will need to be extended, and that will need to be extended along Upper Bench Road, along Narramatta Road, and up again through into the development. And that community sewer will then allow for the water and sewer to be connected to all of the new properties, as well as allow all the properties along Upper Bench Road, Narramatta, that have an opportunity to front onto this new sewer. It will allow them to connect and to benefit from those upgrades.
Great, thanks, Michael. And still with Michael, how will stormwater drainage be managed?
The city bylaws will require that any development, they look at the impact they're having on the storm drain and on the storm drainage on the area, and the measurement tool or the design requirement we require them to meet is the water flowing off the site needs to match before the development and after the development. And as we know, by adding in roads and houses and hard surfacing, we increase the amount of water that comes off the site. And so what we would require the developer to do as part of their subdivision will be to identify that water requirement and to manage that water. The other difference that we will require the developer to do is, as part of the process in Penticton, they're required to design the storm drain from the development to the point of discharge, which in this case will be Okanagan Lake ultimately, and as well as Strut Creek. I think we're all too aware of a couple of instances where this didn't go very well for recent developments in Naramata, and going through the reviews that happened after those errors were made to identify what happened. I think there were some design errors carried out during the design, and I think they weren't captured by the reviewing authorities. The City of Penticton has a very robust review process of all of the engineering submissions as part of these processes. The other thing is that we also require to know that the water can reach the lake. So we don't just look to get the water off-site or just get it to Strut Creek and stop. We make sure that there is no negative impact on Strut Creek all the way to the lake. So that's sort of the philosophy we use, which will address and prevent those kind of mistakes and errors happening again.
Thanks, Michael. And so Michael's question we've heard is, why hasn't a geotechnical assessment been submitted?
At this stage, we don't have a geotechnical report because we're looking at the land use. If we decide that, if the council and the community decide that they want to see this style of development there, then we'll wait until there's actually a subdivision application or an application to do physical works, at which point we will require the developer to do a geotechnical assessment on that land. And that geotechnical assessment will be very specific related to the works that they're doing to make sure that the works they're proposing are safe and work and do not create a hazard or a risk and manage those known hazards. Now, this land has had a number of geotechnical investigations on it over the years. We are aware there are hazards. We are aware there are some challenges. And so what we're looking at doing is, so we know these things. And as we go forward, we do believe that, this land is, from a geotechnical point of view, is suitable for development. And, those issues will be addressed as part of a future subdivision process.
Great. Our next one is, why is development proposed so close to the landfill? Is there a buffer required?
Yes, there is a buffer required. There is a 500-meter buffer has been requested by the RDOS, and they've got a professional report to justify that 500-meter buffer. The developer has requested to reduce that buffer. At this point, the city has said that, we're not the professionals in this matter, but the professionals at this stage have recommended that we hold a 500-meter buffer. And I'm not saying that won't be revised in the future, but right now, the professionals that we have provided the recommendation for a 500-meter buffer. So the city is going to rely on that professional opinion.
Okay, so another very timely concern is, will the risk of wildfires be mitigated?
So as part of a subdivision application and for any future development of this property, the developer will be required to complete a wildfire report, looking at what are the risks, what are the potential solutions to those risks, and that'll happen based around the physical development that they're doing, taking into account roads, trees, vegetation of the actual site and the development. I would expect that that's going to trigger a covenant placed upon all of these properties, and that covenant will, very similar to fire smart policies, will limit what you can and can't use as building materials, how wildfires will be prevented from moving through this area, and how the properties will be protected. So that will be addressed at the subdivision stage.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. And how will environmental lands be protected?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in now and
Okay,
give my
thanks,
co-strike.
Nicole.
So for the environmental lands, the applicant has engaged a qualified environmental professional, which we refer to very frequently as a QEP. They come and they've assessed the property and they help to determine what values exist on the property today. So they're involved in creating recommendations as well as mitigation efforts to ensure minimal impacts to any sensitive ecosystems that exist. The QEP is required to make professional opinions. So they hold a designation that requires them to make those recommendations. The proposed land use plan that we're looking at was developed with an environmental assessment completed so far, and it was designed to avoid the sensitive areas on the site. Should any development application proceed forward, the applicant would be required to apply for and obtain an environmental development permit from the city. That happens prior to any works beginning to occur on the site. And through this permit, the city has the ability to require certain conditions, inspections, as well as bonding to be completed and provided through the process to ensure that works are aligned with those recommendations of the environmental professional. Additionally, through the subdivision process, the city can require no disturb or no build covenants to be registered on the title of the properties to ensure the protection of those sensitive areas. And it also helps to ensure that any future or current owners are aware by having that registered on title that those areas are sensitive and are to be left undisturbed.
Great. Okay, so our next question is, how will this development impact agriculture uses in the area, as this area is known for its agriculture capabilities?
So the property right now, it's not currently used or designated in our official community plan for agriculture. As we reviewed earlier, there isn't an agricultural designation in the OCP for this property. Similarly, the property is not located within the Provincial Agricultural Land Reserve. In our discussions with the Agricultural Land Commission, which is the provincial body mandated with protecting farmland, the proposed development could actually help to reduce those development pressures that we see and the Land Commission sees on farmlands that are located in and along the bench that are within the land reserve area and other active farming lands in and along the bench, not just in the city either. So housing is needed, and often those larger farm properties are trying to accommodate housing units for a variety of reasons. Agricultural lands are not the place for that residential growth to occur. As mentioned, this property is currently not considered or used for agricultural lands and could provide a space for some of those housing units to be accommodated that we need within this area of the city.
Thank you, Nicole. I think we're getting near the end of our questions and we'll get over to yours. So our next question is, has the Penticton Indian Band been consulted about this new proposal?
Yeah, so the developer has previously completed with their previous 2021 application an archaeological assessment of the property. Additionally, through this engagement process that we're going through right now, city staff are following the Penticton Indian Band process to formally consult with them on the proposed development. So this is being done through an online portal that they use to review land use applications in a formal process. If further discussions required or requested by the Penticton Indian Band, staff will ensure that any such requests or meetings of whatnot are accommodated, and we can provide any information that they need in order to provide a response to the city. All feedback that we receive from any of our stakeholders as well as the public will be presented back to council and ultimately will be available for the public and the applicant as well to review and see what different interests and concerns and comments were brought to staff for the proposal.
Great, thank you. And then this is our last question that we have prepared. So the proposal identifies 112 lots. What guarantees are there that the density won't be increased if the bylaw amendments are granted?
Yeah, so the proposal that staff have reviewed has been designed showing the majority of the lots at the minimum subdivision requirements with either the lot width or the lot area. So this means that there isn't much room left for other lots to be added in later. With that in mind, though, this is something that the public should consider, needs to consider, and this raises a good point. So council's not considering the number of lots. We're not approving the number of lots at this time. We're considering the OCP designation as well as that zoning change. So it is possible that a different plan could be submitted that shows a different layout in the future and is able to manage more lots. So we're really looking at that OCP designation at this point in time. The number of lots is reviewed at the time of subdivision when we start looking at all of those other assessments and technical reviews that need to be undertaken as well. So that all factors into the number of lots at the time of subdivision.
Great. Okay, and Nicole, I think you're just going to review where we're at in the process.
Yes, thanks, Joanne. So this slide's important. We've got a number of people here today, and we just want to make sure that everyone is clear on the process and what comes after the engagement. So we're currently, as you can see on the slide, we're currently underway with the engagement, and we are here to collect feedback, share information with the public. Once the engagement period ends, the results will be reviewed, summarized, and shared back with council, the public, as well as the applicant. At this time, the applicant can wish to make changes or adjust the plan and their proposal based on feedback that they hear from the public, any of our stakeholders, or other groups that provide comments. Should the applicant wish to proceed with the proposal, staff would then bring the formal OCP and zoning amendment bylaws to council. If council chooses, they may wish to forward the bylaws to a public hearing for the proposal, which is the legislative requirement for zoning and OCP bylaws. This is the formal opportunity for the public to speak to council directly about their concerns or comments on the proposal. Again, after this, further consideration of the bylaws may occur. So we want to note that while council directed staff to begin engagement, this doesn't signify that council has endorsed, supported, or approved the proposal at this time. This simply indicated that council wants to hear from the community and wants us to come and inform the community and collect feedback about what the public thinks about this development proposal and these lands in general. So considering approval of the development wouldn't occur until bylaws are considered by council after the public hearing. So the important pieces to take away from this nice big process that we go through is that the applicant may wish to make changes to the plans after the engagement closes to reflect some of those comments through the engagement. So we recommend to watch and see if any of those changes occur based on some of the comments that we hear back. And then should council wish to give first reading to the bylaws, they would go to the public hearing where the public can speak directly to council. We encourage you to stay tuned for the public hearing notice to see if you have concerns about the proposal at that time, and encourage you to, if you have concerns or comments, to come and share them either written or in person, or we still have online formats available for our public hearings. So we encourage you to stay tuned and watch for those opportunities if the project moves forward. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Nicole. And I would just offer, so as I mentioned, this procedure was new following the last proposal for Spiller, and we've used it about half a dozen times. And with our most recent proposal that council considered, the North Wiltsey proposal, we did see some amendments to that proposal based on the feedback. And so it's exciting to see the procedure work the way it was intended. And with that, let's get started listening to or responding to the questions in the Q&A. Renata, I'm going to try and get to your questions in the chat at the end, but it would be really helpful if you could put them in the Q&A. And so just a couple of ground rules on the Q&A. So we really want to make sure that we hit every question in the queue. And so out of respect for everyone's time, if questions look like there's duplication, we're likely going to move on. If you're sharing opinions versus asking a question, we're going to kind of move on to the next one. And if you have 10 questions in the queue, we want to make sure many voices are heard and have the opportunity to ask questions. So we will go to the next person and then come back to you. So we'll do our best to hit everyone's questions and we'll get started. So our first question is from John, and he's referring to a specific page in the proposal, and it says that this community preserves the critical qualities of Penticton as well as Naramata's agricultural roots, and he's curious on what way does 111 plus cluster of lots or up to 220 homes do anything to preserve Naramata's agricultural roots? Is that a question for you, Nicole?
I can provide a response to it. So John, I think that the page 9 you're referring to is it's actually from the applicant's development application. I'm hesitant to provide too much of a response since this isn't something that staff has provided forward. This is something that the applicant has indicated within their letter. So I would suggest that we can certainly pass that over to the applicant, and we can provide a response for you, perhaps from them, as to how they feel that that's being addressed within their application. I think that's probably the most appropriate measure for that question.
Okay, thanks for that, Nicole. So John, I see you've got quite a few, so I'm going to go to the next person, which is Lorraine Stephenson. And so Lorraine actually has a question from Dennis, and she says that she's read our draft cluster zone bylaw. The applicant's drawing of the proposed lot suggests this has nothing to do with the classic concept of cluster, more to do with the lineup of narrow lots. I'm not sure what that one word is, leading directly to a future road for future development on adjacent property. A considerable portion of these lots along a wildlife corridor are to be fenced for conservation. So two-part question, is this an adequate buffer for wildlife such as elk, and will landowners pay full taxes on lands they can't use?
So I can provide a response for the buffer for the wildlife, such as elk. Those are items that we would place on the qualified environmental professional or that QEP to provide those. Those are outside of my area of expertise and our city staff. So that's where we do rely on those expertise from our professionals. And as mentioned, the city can explore those no build or no disturb covenants at the time of subdivision. That's the time when those would be reviewed a little bit more. And the landowners paying taxes on the lands they can't use, that question is outside of my area of expertise. So unless if there's another staff member that's comfortable answering that, but I would defer that question.
In this case, the property taxes would not be impacted by the covenant. The property taxes are based around the value of the land, and so whether or not there was a covenant on that land may impact the value of the land, but it wouldn't impact the tax calculation.
Okay, thanks for that. And as Nicole mentioned, so if you're not liking the answers, like we've got your comments here, and if you need more information or more clarity, just give us that feedback. That's what tonight's session is all about. Our next question, Lorraine has clarified that this one is from herself. She says, if this proposal is for 112 single family lots, it represents slightly more than 2% of the target of 4450 new homes in Penticton. This may not be worth the potential risks. Were such costs factored in when staff presented this proposal? Future servicing costs, sorry. Geotechnical, proximity of dump to residences, future servicing costs, environmental. Were these costs factored in when staff presented this proposal? Is that one that, Michael, you can answer that one? Okay.
So at this point, we haven't done that analysis based on this development, looking at the future operational costs. At this point, the entire of the sort of capital costs would be paid for by the developer for all infrastructure and all upgrades and all works required for this development. And then the ongoing operation costs of that would be covered by this property taxes paid by and utility services paid by the future residents of the city of Penticton that would live in this area.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Okay, our next question comes from William. His question is, much of the spiller block is grazing habitat for elk. How will it be ensured that homeowners will be willing to provide for the continued access to grazing when almost 100% of the buildable land will be privately owned?
Yeah, Joanne, I think this question comes back to the same answer regarding those no build and no disturb covenants that would be registered on the title of properties. So the documents being registered as covenants on the properties, as I mentioned earlier, it's a great tool for a local government to use because it informs the current owner, which right now is the applicant, is the one person that owns it. But as it's subdivided off, every title carries that covenant on it. So it's clear for future owners or prospective owners looking at it when they look to purchase that shows up on the title, and it has clear identifiers as to where that's located on the property. So they know, okay, I'm looking at purchasing this property, but I can't I can't do anything with that area. It's sensitive and it needs to remain untouched.
Great. Okay, our next question comes from Goa, or I think, is that how I say the name?
Joa.
Joa, sorry,
I
thank
believe.
you. Yeah. Okay, so Joa is asking, Spiller Road is defined as rural residential, and she understands that rural residential and country residential are the same. So that's part of the question. Are they the same? And that she's referring to the range in or minimum lot, sorry, I think rural residential, country residential minimum lot sizes in the 2040 OCP are 2.47 acres or 1 hectare. Why is the Spiller property in the OCP out of whack, and why is the map showing multi-density? My understanding is the map went into the OCP after all the public input. Did they just mistakenly copy the map density from one of the other growth areas? That's an Audrey question.
Thanks, Joanne. So I'll try to answer some of the question. I think there's more than one. So the first question is around the rural residential and the country residential. So I think that's what we were trying to really kind of focus in the presentation, is that when we talk about there's the OCP and the zoning. So the rural residential that we're talking about is designation in the OCP. And that country residential is something that's in the zoning bylaw and what they can do today. Now, as your question regarding the difference between why one is 1 hectare, the other one is 1 acre, this is a difference that we have noted. And that at this time, this is something that we've noted and we would review as part of the future overall OCP plan for 2023. Now, the current zoning that's on the property, which is the country residential, would allow them to do the subdivision for 1 acre. But again, we have noted, I think there's a lot of comments in the question about that difference, and we wanted to make sure that it is noted. It's something we've noted before, and it's something that we will be addressing as part of sort of future review. Now, if this is something, and I think again, really important to mention that it's important that if something that you know, people feel that we should follow the rural residential and keep the 1 hectare. This is something we're hoping to get in the feedback as well. So welcome to put that as part of your feedback. So thanks, Joanne.
Okay, thank you. So our next one comes from Rita, and I'm just going to offer that if you can try and keep your questions fairly direct, it'll save a lot of study in the process. We can certainly take some of these complex questions offline as well. So from Rita, she refers to an amendment to zone the Spiller block as rural residential in the OCP. It's designated as 1 hectare minimum. Is this hectare minimum lot size, but this lot size is never mentioned. Why then are there going to be 0.5 to 1.5 acre lots? Why isn't the Canadian Horizons request simply for a country residential cluster? Go ahead,
And
Audrey.
again, I thanks, Joanne. And again, I think it's referring back to the same
thing.
The same thing. There is a difference between the rural residential designation of the OCP and the country residential in the zoning bylaw. So we've noted the difference, and it's something that we're looking into.
Great, thanks. And so our next one, Gil, that's an example of providing an opinion in the Q&A section. So thank you for that. Keep that to the chat. And now we're coming in. Josie has a question for us. The rural residential, and I'd like my team to tell me if I think this has been answered already as well. So the rural residential proposal being proposed is 1 hectare, which is 2.47 acres. Yeah, I think this one was answered already, was it not? Yeah, okay.
I just want to provide
Sure.
a quick response for it. So
Okay.
the applicant is requesting to amend the OCP. We've included a specific provision.
Nicole, you've gone mute. Okay, thank you. You're back.
Sorry, Joanne, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
My mic just muted on me there. Sorry. So with this, so the applicant is requesting what we are doing as a site specific for the OCP. So they're amending the OCP away from those higher density designations to this rural residential, but they are seeking that size to be reduced for this particular property. It won't apply to all properties in the city that have that rural residential OCP designation. So that's something that's for the public to consider as well. If this was to go to rural residential, would you also support that smaller half-acre size? We're open to your feedback. We're looking for that as well. Rural residential might be the right designation, but you might not want to see those smaller lots on the property. So I hope that helps to kind of clarify. It was asked in a different way in this question. So
Okay,
I
thank you,
wanted to
Nicole.
provide that. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to scoot by and give Brennan a chance to ask a question here. And so Brennan's question is, will this require city infrastructure expansion such as water and sewer connections? And if so, how much would be the city's cost for such infrastructure work? And I think, is that a Michael Hodges question?
Yes, it is. So at this point, yes, it will require infrastructure upgrade for our water system, our sewer system, our electrical system, and the storm infrastructure works as well. All of those upgrades would be 100% on the cost of the developer. The only time the city would contribute to these costs is if we ask the developer to do something to make our system better. You know, if we said, hey, you only need to put in a 200 mil water main to service the development and the needs, but because we want to do something in the future, we want you to put in a bigger one, we may contribute to those costs. So at this point, we haven't identified anything along those lines. So the developer will pay all of the costs to service this development.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so our next question comes from Tim Scott. And so Tim's curious if any of the additional traffic to and from downtown uses roadways outside of city limits.
Not during peak times. During, like, yes, I'm sure people will leave this development and go outside of the city limits. But during like peak traffic times, all of the traffic is between the development and the city of Penticton, whether it's downtown for working or the schools or sort of the industrial area for working. So that's sort of the bulk direction of the traffic.
Okay, thank you for that. And so Joe, we are sticking to questions about the proposal. Okay, so our next one is going to come from David Cozier. As I mentioned, as we go through the list, we'll go around back to the top, and I know John is waiting patiently for us to come back. So David asked, why aren't there any topographic maps included in the application? There are steep grades, rocky outcroppings, gullies, etc.
So as part of the reviews that have happened on this site before, you know, we are aware that there are challenges with the development and the geography of the site, and that can be addressed as part of the detailed geotechnical assessment of the site. You know, at this point, the question we're really asking is it appropriate land use? You know, is this land use? Is this a good type of residential to have at this point? If the answer to that question is yes, then we can look into, well, how do we do that? How do we physically make that work?
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question comes from Ian. And so he's curious why we think that, or why we believe the bench is going to grow. Arable land is declining and the bench is close to saturation with wineries. These are the two key elements of our economy.
I can try to answer this one a little bit. So I guess the policy documents are what we use as a tool for where we're going to guide that growth in the future. So right now, our OCP, as we mentioned earlier, the future vision for this particular property is adding density in a bigger scale than maybe the public wants to see. We'll see what happens through this engagement process. As we mentioned, in comparing the 2002 OCP to our 2019, that amount of density shrunk a little bit. Through this process, we'll see, does the public want to see that density in there anymore? This is really the key area along the bench, I would say within the city limits, that the density could occur. Other areas along the bench don't have the density being proposed on them, and a lot of the other lands along here do have some of those agriculture designations, as well, being within the land reserve as well.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to go to Bradley Lockhart. Bradley's asking a question regarding Michael's comments that Michael mentioned properties along Naramata Road would be able to connect to new water sewer services. What about existing properties along Spiller Road on the eastern side of the development?
So yes, that would be an example of where the city would have to kick in some additional costs to allow you to connect. So there is no water line running down Spiller Road. There is no sewer line running down Spiller Road. So yes, the development will be designed to allow that to happen, and that'll be at the cost of the developer. But the physical cost of installing those mains up to service those those existing properties would be at the cost of the city. So, or in truth, the people who want to connect to it.
Thanks, Michael. So Joe asked, what road will the runoff water run down?
At the moment, the bulk of the existing site drains towards Strut Creek, and there is a small section of the site that drains to the south through the landfill and down towards Naramata Road. And so the aim of the stormwater management plan is that that won't really change. Again, the bulk of the water will continue to flow towards Strut Creek, and a small amount of water will flow through the south towards Naramata Road. And as part of the detailed design, will require the storm infrastructure to capture and hold that stormwater on the development, so that, and release it at a much slower rate to simulate the sort of pre-development flow rates.
Great, thank you. So our next question comes from Brian, and he's curious if there's going to be any effort to bring transit to the site.
Yeah, I can provide an answer for that question. So through this engagement process, one of the stakeholders that we're engaging with is BC Transit. I'm not the contact that works directly with BC Transit, but at our city yards, we do have a contact that works closely with them. So that's certainly something we'll be referring them. We have referred them the proposal, and we will look to see if there's connection opportunities as we work through this process. So that's certainly something we'll be looking at.
And I would also mention that the road network will be designed to allow for transit, if it, so that at some point in the future, it will be able to be extended there if that's the desire in the future.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think I'm going to go back to the top. That gives John his next question. So I hope my staff team can see this. And there's a site layout. Figure 5 shows a trail that connects to 3 Blind Mice to the north and also connects to Naramata Road to the south. Question is, since Canadian Horizons Spill Road property doesn't border 3 Blind Mice, doesn't connect to Naramata Road, how is Canadian Horizons trail connection actually connect, and who's paying for them to connect? Do we have an answer to that one?
So I can speak to the trail network. Whilst Canadian Horizons own a small part of this area, the official community plan does look at the much larger area, and it looks at the 2 properties to the north of the Canadian Horizons property, and takes into account that, when they develop, they do border upon 3 Blind Mice. And so it does provide a great opportunity for those trails to extend there in the future. So the trails shown on Canadian Horizons going to the north, it's not about connecting to not about connecting to 3 Blind Mice today. It's about allowing to connect to them in the future. When something happens to the north, we don't want to lose that opportunity. The trail to the south will be built out by this development at the cost of the developer, connecting down through to Naramata Road. It will be, under the original proposal, it was a road, and it was a primary access to this development. Under the revised proposal, it is just a bicycle trail, a multi-use pathway to connect down to Naramata. And then we'd look at extending that, requiring the developer to extend that multi-use trail through to the KBR. And that will allow a connection from the KBR directly into this development.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, I'll go back. Next question from Joa. How can Canadian Horizon City think residential country cluster zoning proposed with a long, narrow bowling alley lot side by side, encroaching on environmental corridors is a good idea? You were talking about half acre, not talking about, okay. It sounds more like feedback and a comment versus a question. So thanks for that, Goa, or sorry, Joa. Okay, let's see what William has. Okay, now, so William's asking about trails for walking or biking. Michael, I'm not sure, is this the same as the one you just answered, or do you have more to add?
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add is there will be trails through the development. So the idea is that you'll be able to walk through the development, as well as have trail connections down to the KVR, and hopefully at some point connections through to the Three Blind Mice as well.
Great, thanks for that. And I'm actually that our next question is going to come from Brennan. And I just want to mention, John, some of your questions again look more like comments, and so I may just close those off while we're getting answers to your to Brennan's next question. And so Brennan is asking, how much impact would this development have on the nearby landfill? And in the reverse, what will the impact of the landfill be on the new development?
So as part of the review of this development, the landfill operators, the regional district, have engaged a professional to look into those reviews. The developer, as part of putting the land use, the official community plan in place in for their original land use many years ago, I can't remember the exact year, they also undertook a number of studies to look at that impact. So the impact at this point will be that there's a 500-meter buffer where you can't have residential housing in. That's based on the professional advice. Again, that advice may change, but at this point, that's what the professional advice is, and that's the guidance that the city's going with.
Okay, thank you for that. So Ian's asked a question that I believe Michael answered earlier around infrastructure, who's paying for it. Tim's next question is, will there be covenants to ensure consistent and natural blending finishes? No bright or shiny roofs?
I can try to answer to that, John. So I think what Tim is referring to is what we call a building scheme. So in terms of the city requiring a building scheme of what the potential development would look like, this is not something we typically do. Now, most of the subdivision that we see, for example, Sendero Canyon or the Ridge, for example, newer subdivisions, so the developer choose to put a building scheme on each lot to make sure there's consistencies. There's also the piece about the wildfire interface, so there may be a covenant that would be placed possibly on the properties in terms of building material. And again, that will come at the subdivision stage.
Great, thanks for that. And so David is asking about what this proposal means for the city's commitment to climate action, and referring specifically to Council's declaration of a climate emergency. Will clear cutting the trees to allow for development on 1050 Spiller help the city meet its goals? Will a new car-dependent suburb on the outskirts of the city help the city meet its goals? Very tough question. What is your answer there, Nicole?
So there's two questions here. So to do with clear cutting trees, we do have a hillside development permit that will be required for them to complete before we move to any disturbance on the land. So that's required as part of the subdivision. I might let Audrey speak to that one just in a second here about how trees are reviewed as part of that. And to do with our climate action plan, there are different pieces to our climate action plan to do with building standards, as well as alternative sustainable modes of transportation. So we can certainly try to utilize those other avenues to ensure that we're reducing the climate impact that we have by requiring electrical vehicle stations, promoting alternative modes of transportation, and requiring a higher standard of building to be put in. The city is certainly exploring those other avenues. I would hope that some people will use these alternate forms, but given the location, it is possible, and it is likely that people will use a vehicle to access this particular location, as other properties along the bench probably already do. So Audrey, I'm not sure if you wanted to provide a little more around the hillside. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. So in terms of the hillside development permit, there is a requirement that's inside the application to provide, a tree assessment on the property, as well as all the natural feature. So this is something again that we would look at, and we would look at a tree replacement policy again as well. But it's not something we look at it at this time, but it's definitely something that's in our radar, and that would form part of the subdivision process, but which is also a council decision in terms of that hillside development permit.
Yeah, and that's good feedback to provide to the process. So, so thank you for that. So Joe's curious if the city will plow the winter roads and at what cost?
So yes, the city will plow the city roads the same as they do all other roads within the city. And those costs will be covered by our property taxes, the same as it will be for all other residents of the city.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next question comes from Joa, and I have to, this is kind of a new phenomenon with these things where these paragraph length questions are fairly complex and are challenging to answer in this format. So we'll do our best and encourage you to send those to us separately as well, or chat with staff about it at one of the in-person events. So I guess this question here is, why is there no mention about Strut Creek other than it's seen 300 meters north of the subject property? So Joe is saying that she doesn't agree that there's no negative impact on Strut Creek. How can it be a good idea to have all the runoff going into the creek? Do you have any comment on that, Michael?
So I guess what I would say right now is that the runoff from 90% of the site does currently go into Strut Creek. And so whilst I understand there is a lot of water that flows down Strut Creek at times, it is something that will be reviewed if any development happens on this site. And the vision will be, there will, yes, water will always flow from this site into Strut Creek as it does today. And then we will look at that to make sure that we can do that with no impact. But again, the reason why it hasn't been mentioned and hasn't been fully investigated at this point is we're just trying to determine what is the appropriate land use, what is the appropriate form of development, because the impact on Strut Creek and the size and the design of the drainage system will depend entirely upon what we do on this property. So until we know what we're going to do on this property, we don't know what infrastructure we're going to need. We know the outcome is to not cause a negative impact on Strut Creek. That the outcome we know, but how do we achieve that and how do we manage that? Until we know the land use, we don't know.
Great, thanks, Michael. And also great feedback for us to include in our process. So Joe's asking if Reservoir Road will be the main road into any future development here.
Yes, at this point, Reservoir Road will be the main access in. As I mentioned earlier, there will be a multi-use pathway, but Reservoir Road will be the primary access into this development.
Okay, great. So Ian's curious about the second egress, if there's more than 100 houses that are required by the fire regulations, and reference to a proposed goat track. How is that going to comply with these regulations?
So yes, that is one of the regulations, and regulations is not necessarily the right word for that. It's an idea, it's a guideline. Is it a good one? At this point, we think it is, and it's something definitely that we are looking at. When the developer looked at removing the primary access road from Narromata, primarily because it was something the public really didn't want to see. You know, our question was, well, how can it be safe to have only one primary access into this area? They've come back and proposed a emergency egress trail. So the GOAT trail, as you refer to, will actually be a multi-use pathway designed for vehicle egress. It will not be a road. It will not be something that you'll be able to drive 60 kilometers an hour down. It will be something that could be used in an emergency to evacuate the area. It will meet the minimum safety guidelines for those, for that purpose. The idea is to use only in emergencies to get out at a slow speed.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, our next question comes from Brian. And Brian, kudos to you for taking a bunch of feedback and consolidating it into a nice, simple question. He's mentioned that he's very concerned that this density will promote similar requests from other nearby properties. And is there anything that will prevent that?
Yeah, so I'll take an answer to this question. So every application request that we receive, we will process it and follow through our required process. So it's hard to know which other property would, if they would want to do something, what applications they would require. So we can assure you that, you know, if an OCP amendment would be required for any of those properties, we would proceed through this process, an OCP engagement session again. If a zoning amendment's required, we are required to do public hearings and mail notices to neighbors and advertise in our newspapers as well as online. So we always encourage residents to stay informed and keep watching for those things. It is possible that if this was to happen, that other owners, you know, if you live next door and you're thinking about it, then you might think, you might consider making a similar application, but we would review every application on our end at a staff level. They're all reviewed. We go through a technical review for every single one and go through our required processes for each one to occur.
Great, thanks for that. And I just want to comment that I'm seeing some really informed comments coming through the chat, and people indicating they're not really satisfied with some of the responses and believe that the risk of some of these things are greater than what's being communicated. And that's exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for. So if you're not satisfied with what's being considered around Stroud Creek, you know, we've got some good feedback here that we can take forward and consider. So thank you for that. So Joe is curious about how much influence the staff have regarding this zoning change. It's a good process question. Are you taking that one, Audrey?
I can try to answer that one. So in terms of the influence, I mean, the planning department has an application in front of us that we're going through this engagement process, and we've gone through council. So we review this application in terms of the policy that we currently have. So, but at the end of the day, council has the final decision. So we provide the technical ability and the technical recommendation to council based on the policy that we have in place. But council is sort of, it's got the final answer, or the final approval. Or not approval.
Or refusal, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go. We have an anonymous attendee who's asking, what steps will the city take to protect the existing residence wineries, agriculture establishments that are already established nearby, such as runoff, underground water? They have concerns there could be lawsuits, and a review of Outlook and Kettle Ridge should seriously be completed. So is there a response to this one?
I do agree, and the review of Kettle Ridge and Outlook is underway. There have been a number of reviews and reports, and legal battles are underway. And I've read a lot of that documentation, looking into, you know, how we can ensure these types of situations don't develop in Penticton. Now, I can't speak to the details of those cases. I wasn't specifically involved, but the City of Penticton has a very detailed and robust review and approval process of all of the infrastructure works that would be required as part of any development up here. And as part of those works, we would require detailed reviews of all of the design calculations, all of the designs that have been carried out, to make sure that it is going to work as it is intended to, as it is designed. We will require developers to ensure that what they're designing doesn't have any downstream impacts. You can't just design to the edge of your site and stop. You must design and check all the way to the lake, because that's where the water ultimately goes. And there will, there potentially can be some impacts on Strike Creek. So we need to look at that to confirm that those impacts aren't going to make those flows worse. And that's the whole intent of our design review process of the approvals the city provide, is to ensure that errors like this don't occur.
Okay, thanks for that. And I'll just give people a heads up that technically we have about 10 minutes left. Now staff will stay on and answer more questions, but I just want to make sure that I do thank you for your participation tonight. If you have to leave us, but please do feel free to stay on, and we'll do our best to hit the questions that remain. Okay, so Lori has a question about how can this or other developments fit into the Community Climate Action Plan or BC targets to reduce emissions if the homes connect to Fortis gas. And she's indicated that Penticton can't force developments to not use fossil fuels for heating or cooking under BC law. So it's really a question about our Community Climate Action Plan and these developments and how we're going to start to apply that. Does staff have a thought on that? Or is that feedback we just take away?
I think that's a good item for us to take back. Lori,
Okay.
I don't think that this applies just to this development either. The climate action plan that we have is forming some of those recommendations for us and how we change some of our policies to try to require some higher standards and increase those as we move forward. So it's a great comment, Lori, and we'll definitely take it offline and bring it to our climate action team that we have at the city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Tim has a question about, with the proposed green space and setbacks from the west property, at what points will the development be visible from Naramata Road?
I think this is a tricky question for us to answer, just because we don't quite know what it's going to look like at this point. We can certainly bring this question back to the applicant and see if they have developed any renderings or conceptual items at this time that look at it from Naramata Road. We can see if they have those available, and if they do, we can certainly share those through the Shape Your City platform for attendees and those interested to look and see. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. So Ria has a question about, if mature trees are removed to accommodate development, will they be replaced by similar size indigenous vegetation? Trees are critical for habitat as well as for mitigating the environmental costs of increased concrete and exhaust from traffic. Go ahead, Audrey.
I'd answer that one. I think it's sort of like that two pieces. I tried to answer earlier about the Hillside development permit. So as part of that process, we will be looking at a tree inventory. And then from that, that would lead to a tree replacement policy. In terms of where we would, if we would replace by similar size, that's a bit tricky, but typically we try to, sometimes it's smaller, but over time it'll get to a similar size. To the questions about critical habitat as well, that's something that we kind of address through an environmental development permit. So we try to stay away as possible from the critical habitat, and then so that would be part of the environmental development permit as well. Hope that answered the question. Try to be quick.
So our next question is coming from an anonymous attendee, and Michael, you have to tell me if there's a nuance to this one that you didn't speak to before in regards to infrastructure funding. So is it offsite, a funding of offsite infrastructure? Is that the nuance with this question?
I'm not really sure which question you're
Sorry,
referring
it's
to.
anonymous attendee, and the question is, how much infrastructure costs will be required to build out to this area? For the amount of houses, it would seem high per house. I believe the OCP outlines all of these reasons why infill makes more sense with reduced costs. How much of these costs will be recovered by developer?
So yes, the cost of extending out these services will be entirely paid for by the developer. I'm assuming they believe that the cost will be recovered as part of this development. They're in this to make money. Yes, this is more expensive than developing a property in downtown Penticton from a developer's point of view and the ongoing maintenance to the city. But, they're looking to develop a large number of homes, which, unfortunately, well, that space isn't available in the city. So yes, there is a cost to this development that the developer will have to pay. And they'll pay 100% of the costs to bring all of the services to this site and within the site.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to move to a new question coming from Rob Hill. Why does the city entertain rezoning of property when the sole purpose of this rezoning is to increase the profitability of the development? Go ahead,
I
Audrey.
I can jump on this one.
Sure.
I think it's easy to forget that this is a hugely desirable place for residents, both within the region and outside the region that want to move here. We rely on developers to build our housing for us. That's the way that the system is set up. Those developers do this as a job, and there is a profit motive certainly to do with this. But we also have a responsibility to accommodate demand for housing. This is a as I said, very desirable place to live, both on the bench, in Penticton, anywhere you go. And zoning is the tool that we use to allocate that growth, whether it's in the downtown to allow for high rise, whether it's in more rural areas to allow additional density. That's our mechanism for allowing this growth to happen in a managed way. So there's certainly some profit motive there, but that's the case. That's the way our system is set up. That's the case with all development that we see in the city. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. And again, if you need more, you can just give us that feedback and we'll just take it away. And so A. Engel is asking, will the road down 880 Naramata Road be built as it would have been in the previous proposal from CH?
No, the current proposal doesn't have the road down through to Naramata Road, and as part of their proposal. It does show a multi-use pathway that doubles as an emergency egress. So there will be a multi-use pathway down there, but not a full access road.
Okay. Okay, a new question from a new participant. Kathy's curious, at what point does the city of Penticton say enough growth has, or will there be an option for residents to voice their thoughts on the size of our city? Is that an Audrey question?
I can try to answer to that one. So I think, that's the purpose of why we're doing engagement at this point. We have an official community plan that showed, area of growth. And there is an application in front of us to look at those designations. So yes, we are, taking the comments and sharing, and that's the whole purpose of Shape Your City, and then us, getting the feedback. So to answer your question, and this is one option to share your thoughts.
Okay. So a new question from Renata. So let's see if I can find the question. Okay. Renata is talking about the historical or the scientific arguments against sprawling suburban development and having negative impacts on habitat fragmentation, water and air pollution, increased infrastructure costs, inequality, and social homogeneity. So Renata's curious, why is the city continuing to entertain a development that, in her view, is clearly contradictory to scientific findings, particularly in the face of worsening climate change? And so I think we did address that in the presentation in terms of how we've reduced our amount of single family development dramatically in the OCP. But this was one of, was it 3 or 4 areas that did remain for single family. Does anyone have anything else that they wanted to add to that one, or?
I can add a bit more on this one.
Sure.
I think when you look at our growth plan for the city and the demand for housing in our region, you know, single family housing is a very, very desirable product. When we're trying to create a balanced community with housing options all across the income spectrum, single family housing is an important part of that offering. As you mentioned, you know, 20% of our housing, our current housing that we're building is single family. 80% is coming in at a multifamily or infill format. So we're certainly moving to more smaller units, more multifamily units, but there's still a really, really strong desire to have housing in that single family format. That doesn't mean that we need to construct it in ways that are damaging to the environment. You know, we've embraced the step code for the builds themselves. We've brought in really stringent Hillside guidelines to ensure that when we are developing in these more rural areas, it's done in a sensitive, thoughtful way that's preserving the hillside character, that's preserving vegetation and/or replacing vegetation and replacing tree canopies. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of evidence that traditional sprawl development is not you know, the best thing for the environment, but there are ways to do suburban or single family development that doesn't have the negative impacts that we've seen historically.
Okay. Thank you for that. And so a new question from a question from a new person, Margie. And I think we've kind of addressed this a bit, but so what is the plan for evacuation in event of an emergency, such as a fire on a bench, the current single road, or are there other plans? So Michael, I think you answered that one with the goat trail reference, that one will be developed into a multi-use path that will allow for vehicles to exit the development in an emergency. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. All right. I've wanted to get to this question from William about, can City Council adopt the amendment to RC but deny the new zoning designation of RCC? Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, I saw this question as well, and it's kind of an easy one for us. The only thing I just want to clarify is, so can the city adopt the amendment? I'm thinking it's to the OCP, to the rural residential zone, but deny the new zoning of the country residential cluster. So the easy answer for us is yes, council could decide to change the OCP designation and not grant the zoning at this time. So we'll see how the engagement goes and see what ends up being brought to council and what they decide to do with it. But they do have a variety of options that they can choose to do when it comes to the table for them to consider.
Great, thank you for that. And let's see, I think I'm moving back. Oh, I've got a question from a new person, Debbie. So let's see, so Debbie's asking, she said she's spoken to a number of international tourists here cycling and competing in Grand Fondo, etc., as this is a chosen spot around the world. My question is, how will safety be ensured for these cyclists so they will continue to come here to cycle?
So as part of any development on the site, we'd require a traffic impact assessment looking at not just traffic volumes, but also safety along those roads. And so, you know, part of what we're looking at doing is expanding the protected cycle network with a multi-use pathway and a connection through to the KVR would be specifically as part of this development. But also we'd look into see, would this development and the additional traffic from this development cause any you know, safety issues that we would need to address.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, where are we at? Okay, I think We've got one from Deb Berry is a new question. So Deb Berry's asking, are you aware of the recent decision made by Kelowna City Council, which they declined the proposal based on regarding a similar Hillside proposal and the fact that they adjusted their OCP?
Yeah, so we're definitely, I think all of our city staff are aware of the decision that Kelowna made, I believe it was last year, regarding the Canadian Horizons proposal there. It's very difficult for us to make a comparison between the two, as they are very different. Kelowna, I wouldn't try to compare Penticton to Kelowna, as we are quite different. Sometimes residents don't like when we do that, same with Vancouver. So they are very different. There's some concerns I would imagine are very similar, but we're definitely aware of that decision that happened. And I mean, we do try to follow some of those other items and see what other communities are doing across BC as well.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, so we've got a question from a new person, Elizabeth Lawrence, if staff can go down there. So Fortis has contemplated a gas pipeline extension near this property. What communication is ongoing with Fortis? Also, development activity is taking place on the neighboring property. What is the impact of this activity on the proposal? So I think it's kind of an update on what's happening with that Fortis work. Michael?
So Fortis have, as I think many people know, Fortis are proposing to extend a new gas line through this area. And that gas line, as part of that, they've reached out and been in negotiations with all landowners that are being impacted. And you know, while I'm not completely aware of all of the specifics of the negotiations between the current landowners, Canadian Horizons, and Fortis Gas, you know, I know that they have reached an agreement, and this development that's being proposed is taking into account the proposed location of the Fortis gas line. As for other development activity in the area, I have seen a few comments in the chat, as well as some questions around a property just to the north of this location that is has done significant earthworks and regrading of their property. And so yes, the city is aware that there is works happening in the area of an agricultural nature, and you know, so we are aware of that, and those activities happening around won't have any impact upon this proposal.
Okay. Okay, so we have another question from a new person, Cindy Burnett. So related to runoff, is it going to be maintained to pre-development levels? Where does all the water being imported through the city water system go? Is that a question you can answer, Michael?
So the city's water system brings in water through two sources, Penticton Creek and Okanagan Lake. The water treatment plant and the distribution system has sufficient capacity for the growth that's proposed within Penticton. And so whilst there will need to be localized extensions, you know, extend the pipes and up the hill so that these services can reach, but from a capacity point of view, the existing system has the capacity to service these areas. And the same is for the sewer network. There will need to be some upgrades in some of the transmission mains between this development and the sewer treatment facility. But those upgrades have been identified, and we require the developer to do that as part of any upgrade or any development. Sorry.
Thanks for that. And I just want to mention for everyone who's submitting questions, we are going to get to as many as we can before 8:30. We do have other engagement opportunities where you can talk to staff in person, and also another online session. These questions can also be submitted through Shape Your City, where we will get a response within 48 hours. There's also a really good forum on there that doesn't have any comments in it, and it's a really great place for you to share this feedback and have these discussions as well. And that way the entire community has access to what you're saying versus keeping it here. And as I mentioned, we will publish this information that we've shared, and we will redact your name. So we'll just have your comments for others to see. Okay, where are we at now? Okay, I think this is a question from a new person, and then we're back to the top, or maybe two new people. So Doug Bradley is curious about what the anticipated costs of these homes are when listed on the MLS.
It's a tricky question for us to answer at this time. We aren't always provided, we're usually not provided this information unless there are, agreements being put in for affordable housing. At this time, I think this is a question that can't really be answered. So the applicant at this time doesn't even know what the density is that they're going to be able to build to, how many houses they're going to be able to have, and what forms they're going to be. So until those items are resolved for them and clarified, and they have a proposal put forward, I think that question is isn't possible for us to provide an answer for.
Hey, thank you. And then after Doug, we'll go back up to the top. So Doug Gibson, Reservoir Road and Aramata Road Junction is a challenge now with the additional traffic. How will this be handled? Do you have some comments on that, Michael?
As part of the traffic reviews that have taken to date, we have looked at upgrade options. There are two primary ones. One is the potential installation of a roundabout at that location, and the other is looking at through the use of bulb outs, concrete curb, gutters, trying to create a more safe intersection. So there are two options that are on the table, and as we go through, we'll do a lot more study to determine what is the appropriate response there.
Okay, great. So we're back to the top. We still have 29 questions. It's going to be pretty tricky to get through all of these. John, when I looked at your first comments here, you don't actually finish your question. So I'm going to have to move on to the next one. And if you want to try and clarify or send us the question, we'll happily take that. So your next question, though, I will give you this one. So you're asking about that there are fully mature trees that are obviously 20 to 30 years old, and if they are being removed and are clear cutting the land, will they leave a healthy selection of these mature trees in place on each individual lot, just like they show in their renderings? So I'm not sure if we fully answered all the tree questions earlier, but is that one you can handle, Michael?
Sorry, I think with the trees, I think probably Audrey's in a better position to.
Okay.
I think.
Michael, I was going to jump in, but no worries. I mean, we tried to answer. I mean, there will be, because of the sensitivity on this property and the environmental sensitivity, there will be trees that will be, kept. Whether or not these are the trees that that you're referencing, that I'm not too sure, but they definitely there'll be trees that will be assessed and then will stay on the property. Not sure what else is in the kitchen. But...
Yeah, I think that's right. So
yeah.
Okay. So Brian's curious if carriage homes will be permitted.
So with the proposed zoning, as with lots of our residential zones and actually even our agriculture zones, carriage houses are an acceptable form. In the zones that we're probably looking at here, they would be permitted a single family home and either a carriage house or a secondary suite. So it's one or the other. They could have a suite or a carriage house in addition to their main house there.
Okay. Okay, so Joe is curious about the environmental report, and was there no reference to the elk on the report? Is there someone that can speak to that?
Yeah, I believe that they do mention elk within the assessment that they've provided at this time. We can certainly review through and look into that question. It's quite detailed, the question that Joe is asking, so we can certainly look into it and provide a little bit more response and even try to reach out to the professional and see if they have more of a response for you, because that's definitely up their alley as well.
And then just to answer the first question, like who hires the environmental, it's up to the developer. So there is a process to the environmental development permit, but this is something that's it's the developer that hired the consultant, the qualified environmental professional.
Great, thank you for that. So let's see. So Tim is curious about, he noted the proposal drainage catch basins on the proposal. He couldn't see their placement, and he assumes this will be to reduce excessive runoff. Could this be used through recycling for irrigation and provide a net zero impact? Creative solution, Tim.
Yes, it could. And I would love to see that, and there are definitely options that we have moving forward. We know that the drainage system will have storage facilities. We know it will have catch basins, it will have pipes. We know all of these things, but we haven't done the design yet. So, you know, the idea is that the catch basins and the storage within the facility will hold up and hold water on the site and then slowly release it onto into the creek or into the lake to sort of mimic the real world, the existing situation. You know, do we have the ability to utilize that in water reuse? Yes, you know, that is there. It's not within their current proposal. So if that's something you would like to see, I strongly recommend you provide that feedback into Shape Your City, and it's something that we can that is technically possible.
Yep, thanks for that, Tim. Okay, and so William's next question is again related to the Community Climate Action Plan and the city's commitments. And I think that we made the point that we do need to review this and consider it in the context of climate action. And that's really great feedback and direction as well. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Joa is curious about maintenance costs for Hillside development. So it's one thing for the developer to pay the upfront capital cost, but what about the maintenance costs? Aren't the maintenance costs on Hillside developments really expensive compared to building in the city?
So yes, the developer pays for the upfront costs, and the city does pay for the ongoing maintenance of this infrastructure. At this point, we expect that the property tax revenue from this area, along with the utility revenue, would be more than enough to cover the cost of the operation and maintenance of this additional infrastructure.
Okay. And so our next question from A. Engel is, how will this development impact agritourism on Naramata Road? Do we have a response to that? Everyone's getting tired. And so I will mention we probably will have a hard stop at 8:30. And if we can't answer this question now, we will definitely take it away and see if we can provide a response in the next few days. And again, as I mentioned, there is an opportunity to submit questions on Shape Your City that gives us 48 hours to do the research we need to do to get the answers. Okay, so Renata, your next question really sounds more like feedback than a question that we can answer related to the proposal. So she doesn't understand how this development could enhance the beauty of the natural environment and the countryside. So that's feedback that we can take into the process. And if I'm missing something there, staff, please feel free to jump in. Okay, so Joe's curious about water runoff on Naramata Road, that we'll have washouts on this road, and you're okay with that. Do we expect washouts on this road?
So as part of any area that is the flow path from water for this development, so anywhere where we are expecting water from this development to go, we will carry out a detailed design and supervise the construction to make sure that those flow paths and those water alignments are built correctly, designed correctly, and don't create these issues. Drainage infrastructure always fails in massive storms and major events. Yes, there will be times where these things are an issue, but that's the nature of this kind of infrastructure. But the idea is, as part of this development, we will make sure that the infrastructure is sized for the design rain events.
Okay, thank you for that. So Angle has asked if we can show on the map where the Force BC capacity upgrade gas pipeline will be. Unfortunately, I'm the one with the controls, but maybe Michael, you can describe and I can try and point if is it sufficient on this
I'm
map
not,
or?
My understanding is that the proposed gas line is along the western boundary of the development in a proposed, and that's where it's proposed. However, I strongly recommend that Fortis Gas have a website which has a really nice interactive map showing their proposed alignment. So don't take my word for it, please. Fortis have a really great interactive website where you can follow the alignment where it's currently proposed. So please go and look at that.
Okay, great. So Renata is speaking to road transit modifications to accommodate this development because the road is busy. Did you address that already? Or do you have anything to add there, Michael?
Yeah, as part of the traffic impact assessment that's been carried out, with the reduced number of households, the impact on the existing road during peak times is not causing the road to fail.
Okay. And so now William's referring to the Kelowna proposal again that was posed. And so again, this feels a lot more like feedback than a question around, can we be assured this development won't be another area of high-end homes whose services are subsidized by the rest of the population? Does anyone want to speak to that one?
I think that goes to stuff that we've already said, that the
Okay.
costs will be covered by the property taxes of the area, of the residents who live in those areas.
And if that's, if you have a different views on that, William, you can certainly
Please.
provide that feedback. Yeah.
Definitely, this is
Yeah.
something that we need. If that's your opinion, please provide that in the feedback.
Yeah. And so Rob's curious about, there's recently appeared on the southern edge of Three Blind Mice, a large pile of gravel, at least the width of a football field. Is the city aware of this earthworks activity? Is there any permitting or development plans associated with it? Does this activity have anything to do with the proposed property?
No, this activity doesn't have anything to do with the proposed activity. The owner of the property to the north of this is looking at undertaking some agricultural works, and we're working through the permitting process for that right now.
Okay, thank you. Will access to development be via spiller? And if so, what will happen to the land eyesore on Naramata Road, the site of the original access point?
So yes, the access will be through Spiller Road, and the property at 880 Naramata Road is slated for redevelopment of some kind, but at the moment, it's until the owner is sure of what's happening at this development, they're not sure what the plan is for that property at 880 Naramata Road.
Michael, just to add to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 880 Naramata Road will also accommodate the emergency egress as well as the water and sewer line, I believe, through there as well. So
yeah, that's correct. And that's part of the challenges with them. They don't want to develop or sell the land until they know what they need to allow this development to go ahead. Once they know where the trails, where the multi-use pathway, the utility services and all that kind of stuff, then they'll know what's left, which can be then, further developed or sold or better utilized.
Okay, great, thanks. And just a reminder, we're going to do a hard stop at 8:30. And if your questions were missed, please do submit them to Shape Your City, and then we'll be able to answer them. And we're starting to see our attendance drop off. So I know that, our participants are, are getting tired too. Okay. And so I'm going to move on to Lorraine's question. Will the emergency egress road be cleared of snow in the winter?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's something that we'd have to look at as part of, so the city hasn't accepted the fact that the emergency egress is an acceptable solution. It's what's being proposed by the developer. And it's something that we need to look into in a little bit more closely. And this is one of the issues that we need to look at is it utilized all year round?
Okay.
If it's only for wildfires, then it doesn't need to be utilized in the winter. If it's for other reasons, then maybe it does. I guess that's sort of the challenge that we're looking at.
Okay, so Renata's next question is, there seems to be plans for emergency road out of the development, but what does this mean for emergency evacuation along Naramata Road?
So Naramata Road itself is a single road that services quite a large area, both within Penticton and outside of Penticton. That's outside of the scope of something that I could speak to, and it would be something, those questions would need to be directed towards our emergency services department.
Great, okay, thank you. So Lori asks if there'd be any negotiations with the developers RE fossil fuels. So that's definitely feedback that we can provide. Okay, Deb, okay, is referring to the proposal. I think we've addressed that already. I've lost it now. Okay, here we go. I've lost my my way here. I'm going to go up to the top again then with William's question. The property is okay. Canadian Horizons reneged on their bond to landscape Sendero Canyon, and they raised a productive peach orchard at 880 Naramata Road and filled it with sand, gravel, and boulders. Now the property is a weed farm for invasive species. How can we be sure they will adhere to any forthcoming agreements to comply with policy? Tough questions. Okay, Michael?
As
So
part of the policies and the agreements that we make with the developer moving forward, and Sendero Canyon was a great example of where the developer didn't meet the standards that we were expecting and that they'd agreed to. And the city holds money. Cash is king. And where we can, we hold large amounts of cash so that if the developer doesn't follow up on their commitments, we're holding that money so that we can either force them to do it, or that we can step in and do it ourselves. This is not an ideal situation. This is, in my 20 years, I've done this once on a large project, and that was at Sendero. So it's not a common occurrence, but it is something that we are always aware of, and always, we don't just want to hear a nice commitment from a developer. We need to make sure that we have the power to hold them to that commitment. And that's one of the things that staff are responsible for.
Great, thank you. And I think that same kind of response applies to Lori's question. Angle's curious if the city's open to other ideas for using the land, even if it would require to be purchased by a land trust or city or other public hand. Go ahead, Blake.
Sure. Yeah, and this has come up a lot. This came up with the Wiltsey development. Why doesn't the city just purchase the land and turn it into a city park? That's a real challenge for the city's obviously limited with our ability to purchase land. We also have a need for housing in the city, and this is an identified growth area. But one of the things that council and staff really put our minds to is what public and community benefit do we get from these types of development? Is it improvements on Naramata Road? Is it protected bike lanes? Is it dedicated park, access to lands that we don't currently have access to? Is it infrastructure upgrades? So even though maybe we're not necessarily purchasing the entire property, the community does receive a lot of benefit from the development of lands, and I think staff have negotiated some really positive things for the community over the past few developments. Whether you want to talk about the bluffs at Skaha, where the city negotiated 70 hectares of land added to the provincial park and access to the climbing bluffs, whether it's at the Wiltsey lands, where another 44 acres of natural area, as well as manicured and natural parks. So even though these lands are going to be developed, we still do look to And council looks to, well, the developer's making money. How do we get some community benefit for that back to the taxpayers and to the community to use these lands in ways that provide benefit to everybody. So I don't know if that exactly answered your question. Buying out the land from under the developer to protect it from development. We've seen the land trust do similar things in more rural areas, but yeah, probably not an option for this particular piece of land from the city's perspective.
Great. Okay, thanks. I did promise a hard stop at 8:30. So if you had any questions that were missed, please do enter them in Shape Your City, or you can also email staff at getconnected@penticton.ca. And so these, the findings here will be published on Shape Your City. We will also, once we receive all the feedback forms, we strongly encourage you to submit the feedback forms. I know there's comments about how will the data be reported, how will the results be shared. The feedback forms are a super important part of that process. And just before you all leave me, we're down to 26 participants. I'm going to throw one more poll up. And this poll is, so now you have done your part. You have done your part. You have listened to the presentation. You have answered or asked your questions. Where are you at in terms of your support for this development? So I'll just launch that one for you. I should have asked the question if the session changed your mind at all, and in what regard. That actually is a question on the feedback form. I think something, or actually I think we asked people how much they like this proposal versus the previous one. So do make sure you fill out those feedback forms. There are two separate ones, one's for residents and one for non-residents. And the questions are the same, and the data is going to be, or the contributions will be considered equally and shared equally as well. Okay, we're at about 20 of our 26 or 21 of our 26 participants. And I'm just going to go ahead and pause it because the others are probably headed off already for their night. So let's just see where we're at. So I'm sharing, so still some folks that are not supportive of this proposal, and then a smaller number that are supportive. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating tonight. That was a good long session with lots of really valuable input. And with that, I'm just going to let you have the rest of your evening back. Have a good night.